So now that we've gone out and shot these revolvers and gotten them nice and dirty for us, let's talk a little bit about some of the maintenance specifics that need to happen with these to keep up their reputation of reliability that they've built over the last century or so. You know, one of the things that makes revolvers reliable is good maintenance. And in order to do that, you need some specialized tools that you don't necessarily see with semi-autos. Some of that would include brushes that are actually sized for the chamber of the revolver and not just for the barrel. So a couple different brushes that you're going to need: a chamber brush, and usually they're shorter, the bore brush, to work on these. I also like copper, not stainless. Stainless is not good around blued guns or stainless guns, it'll scratch it, but the double-ended toothbrushes. And then the regular nylon ones are really handy to have also. The other thing that's really important to have when you work on revolvers are some screwdrivers that actually fit the screw slots on the guns. If you look at this old Model 27 that I've got, you can see that little screw in the top that at the front of the rear sight leaf has a little bit of wear to it where someone's gotten into it with a non-proper fitting screwdriver. What I like to use are bits from Brownells. This is a Smith & Wesson set. They come in 3 sizes. They fit all the different screw heads on the gun nicely so that you don't bung up the screw slots in it. And the other thing to know is that as we move forward in generations of Smith & Wessons, some of the screws have changed on these, so make sure you're using the right bit for the right purpose on these. Where I like to start out with these, obviously these have been checked, they're unloaded, they're ready to be cleaned, but I like to start with giving them a good soaking of solvent, and I like to let that sit on these for a little bit, especially if I shoot cast ammunition, lead ammunition for lack of a better term. They need to have good solvent that will cut that, put on them, and then set for a little bit. It's not something that you can just wipe on, wipe off, and be done. These take a little bit more time. What works really good for getting that into the guns is a Glock brush and a Glock rod. And I'll go ahead and soak my bore with that, a couple strokes with the brush, and then I'm going to do the same thing with each chamber on the cylinder. And then in order to get some of the carbon off the face of the cylinder, I'm going to go ahead and brush a little bit of that solvent onto here. And then as long as it's warm enough, I'm going to let this set for about 10 minutes. I'm also going to come in and touch the back of the barrel and the forcing cone area. This gets pretty carboned up. And also back here in the firing pin area on the back of the recoil shield, I'm going to touch that a little bit. And I'm going to just let this sit on there for about 10 minutes. So one of the reasons it's really important to get the chambers clean on a revolver, if you've been shooting 38 special, 44 special, 45 Schofield, something shorter than what the gun is actually chambered for, like this 38 and 357 Magnum, there's a difference in case length. And what happens, especially with cast lead rounds, you'll start to get some carbon buildup and lead buildup at the front of this cartridge in the chamber. Then if I switch over to something like this 357 Magnum defensive load without getting that cleaned out, I fire those, I go to eject, that case is expanded against that carbon and lead fouling ring in there. It makes it really hard to get out. So we want to make sure that we get that out of there. And what we're going to use to do that, after I've let the solvent set in here for a little bit, like we discussed earlier, is the chamber brush. And I'll show you how to do that. So I put a little bit of Blue Wonder on the chamber brush. I'm going to run it in part way, not all the way out the face. And I've got a rod that doesn't pivot so that I can actually twist the chamber brush in the chamber. And as I'm doing that, I'll let it back out a little bit and go back in. But that's going to help break down that carbon and lead fouling ring in there. I'm just going to continue that process around the cylinder until I've worked on all of the chambers. Once we've done that a couple of times, that should get most of that fouling out of there, and then we'll take some patches and get that solvent back out of the chambers, and we'll be good to go. So now we've let the solvent set in the chambers for a little bit and gotten our chamber brush in there, broken that all up. We'll take some nice cotton patches on a correct jag to go through here. We'll push that through and out the front, so back to front. And you can see that that's taken out quite a bit of the carbon fouling in there. And we'll just repeat that through the process. If I've got good patches like this where I'm not getting penetration through, I can use it again. I can switch to the next chamber, get a couple chambers per patch. If I'm getting penetration of the fouling through my patch though, I'll go ahead and use a clean one for each chamber. But you can definitely see what we're getting out of there. I shot this gun the other day with some 38 lead wad cutter ammo, so it was pretty fouled up. I want to be able to go back to 357, so I need to get that out of my chambers. You can see that it's starting to come out pretty clean now. Once I've done that, once I've got all of my chambers and the cylinder cleaned out, on the older Smith & Wessons, you can see that the chambers are countersunk. You can see the countersinking right here where the rim actually drops all the way in and is flush with the back of the cylinder. What happens is I get some solvent buildup in here and now fouling as that all comes out of there with the brushing. If I don't go back in and clean this out, then that can harden up and it can really impede the cartridges wanting to drop into the gun, especially if I do that for quite some time. That can get built up and it kind of gets to be a waxy residue in there. So what I do to deal with that is I come in with a patch and I've got an old cleaning tool that the ends are broken off of. It's plastic, so it's non-marring, but has got flats on the ends and it's tapered. So I can get in here pretty easy and I get on that edge of each chamber and I clean that out. And you can see how much fouling I got out of that just by running it around there. So it's really important to go through and finish that. The other thing that's important to do on the cylinder as you get there is to clean underneath the extractor star or ejector star, depending on which brand you're talking about. But get in here with your double-ended nylon toothbrush and clean this out and break out any loose powder fouling or anything like that, because it doesn't take much in the way of powder granules to get trapped underneath here. And then that extractor star won't seat all the way. You get hard rotation or no rotation in your cylinder, causing some real issues. So I talked about the importance of keeping the cylinder clean on the Revolver. One of the things you can do to help yourself out if you're taking one of these through maybe a concealed carry class or going to one of Chris's classes with it, carry one of these double-ended toothbrushes with you on the range deck. Stick it in a pocket somewhere. But in between stages, if it's allowed on the range, go ahead and clean underneath the extractor star, the back of the cylinder. Get that unburned powder out of there, and that'll keep these running a lot longer. The other thing that I like to take with me is a dry version of the Glock brush. Doesn't have any solvent on it, and that way in between stages I can go in and run that into the chambers and knock out some of that fouling that's in there. And it'll keep these up and running a lot longer than just continuing to shoot it and let that build up through the course of the day. So another way we can address the cylinder on the Revolver is cleaning them and get into the frame a little bit is to actually dismount the cylinder. On Smith & Wessons, it's really easy to do. It's one screw, and I'll show you how to do that. On Rugers, you actually have to take them down further. And Colts, you can take the cylinder out pretty easily. Keep in mind that there are some hidden parts on Colts when you disassemble them, so take a good look at your gun, get some instruction on it specifically before you decide to just break it down. But I get the proper bit for my screwdriver, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove what some people refer to as the crane screw or crane retention screw. It is the forwardmost screw on a Smith & Wesson Revolver on the side plate. I'm going to come in, make sure that my screwdriver fits correctly, take this out, set it aside someplace safe where I can keep an eye on it, doesn't end up on the shop floor. Open my cylinder again, and now what I'm going to do, the cylinder is going to stay where it is right now. I'm going to pull the cylinder crane forward like that, and then I can just lift the cylinder away. This brings me to a point on the cylinder crane. Every once in a while, you need to pull this apart and lubricate these two bearing surfaces in here. You'll get fouling in here, not a lot, but over time it will build up. It can also impede cylinder rotation, and you can see some of the fouling build up here on the crane. That can be scrubbed off with your double-ended toothbrush and a little bit of solvent. Take care of that. It also allows you a little bit easier access now to get into the frame area of the Revolver, clean the back of the barrel extension, the forcing cone area, that kind of thing. And then if I wanted to, if I had some really nice padded jaws for my shop vise, I can carefully, not cranking down really hard on this, put this in there where I can scrub it a lot easier with my chamber brushes. And then you can see the fouling that's built up on the back of this. This cylinder's cut for moon clips. So you can see what needs to be scrubbed off of here. And then there's also fouling underneath that needs to be scrubbed out on this one as well. So we can scrub that. I can scrub off the face of the cylinder a little bit if I want to. Scrub off these carbon marks on the sides. Get this all nice and clean again and ready to go back in the holster. So we've dismounted the cylinder from this Revolver to get a better view of the rear of the barrel and the forcing cone area. This is the one that I had shot some cast lead cartridges through. What you can see is in the forcing cone area, the silver color at the very back is actually a little bit of leading, a little bit of lead buildup in here. And that needs to be removed. The reason that's important is on a smaller frame gun like this K-frame, you can see how thin the bottom of the forcing cone is. In fact, there's a little flat cut here. If I let this get really leaded up and then I put a really high pressure 357 Magnum behind that, I can potentially crack that area of the forcing cone. So I'm going to show you a tool that will help us take care of that leading in there. This is a tool that's been around for a really long time. It's the Lewis lead remover. And to get lead out of the forcing cone, it goes on this tapered spindle with this brass screen. And the way it works, I feed the aluminum rod down the barrel. I thread this cone onto the rod. I get that snugged up, and then I pull it into the forcing cone and I turn it in the forcing cone like this. And I'm putting a little bit of pressure on it. And then as it comes out, you can see a little bit of lead on there that has been removed from the forcing cone. And this can allow my K-frame to be safe to fire again with higher pressure ammunition without risk of cracking the forcing cone. It's also good for these to get it cleaned out of there once in a while. It improves accuracy, helps us out quite a bit. So in the Revolver that we dismounted to clean the cylinder, got everything all cleaned up, clean underneath the extractor star so it's nice and clean. One place I don't lube on these is this piece of the extractor rod because I don't want the oil to suck debris into here when I'm shooting it. What I will lube on the crane, I'll lube the front bearing surface just a little bit, doesn't take a lot. The back bearing surface, same thing, doesn't take much. I'll lube right here where it's going to interface with the frame on the Revolver and just kind of spread that around. And just a little bit of drop in here where the strain screw goes. And then I'm going to wipe the excess onto this shaft, maybe add just a touch onto here. The way it's going to go back together is I'm going to set everything up where the crane's going to start to go in, and then I'm going to feed it into the frame, close it, and then I'll put the strain screw back in. I'll check my screws for tightness, make sure I check the screw on my rear sight leaf for tightness and the thumb piece nut, and I'm good to go. So we've got the Revolver back together again. It's nice, clean, lubed, ready to go. The Revolver's reputation for reliability came from a time period when we carried 18 to 30 rounds of ammunition on our belt, and it would reliably run through that without a problem if it was kept meticulously clean. They are an extremely reliable piece of equipment, but again, they have to be maintained properly just like any other piece of equipment. There is no magic that makes them better or worse than a semi-automatic pistol. It's just the same thing that's always been. Good, solid maintenance on the Revolver, and they will definitely work well for you.